The Cloaca Maxima still carries stormwater through Rome. It was built in 600 BCE. The pump station in downtown Detroit failed in 2023. Both systems move roughly the same volume. One was built by slaves using stone and gravity. One cost $400 million. The difference is not technology. The difference is that Rome understood the city as a living organism. We understood it as a machine. If you have ever driven through a downtown and felt that hollow recognition, you already know what I am about to say. You just never had the words for it. Here is the scale of the problem. Archaeologists have catalogued over 10,000 abandoned cities across human history. Çatalhöyük in Anatolia, abandoned around 5700 BCE after 1,000 years of continuous habitation. Angkor in Cambodia, the largest pre-industrial city on Earth, abandoned around 1431 CE after a series of severe droughts cut monsoon rainfall by 30%. Entire civilizations walked away from infrastructure that had taken generations to build. But here is the strange part. Most of those cities were abandoned because something external broke. Climate change, invasion, resource depletion. The modern ghost town problem is different. We are abandoning cities that still have infrastructure, that still have resources, that still have functional buildings. 10,000 abandoned cities across history, and yet we are creating new ghost towns for entirely different reasons. If that pattern bothers you the way it bothers me, subscribe. Because we are tracking the forensic evidence of what actually kills a city, and the answers are not what the textbooks say. Leave a comment with the name of one downtown in your area that you suspect is already on this trajectory. I want to see if the pattern holds across your region. Recent research tested this. A team at the University of California analyzed satellite imagery of over 3,000 American downtowns. They found that the cities abandoned in the last 50 years were not those hit by natural disasters or economic collapse. They were cities that followed a specific planning philosophy. The pattern was statistically significant enough to predict which cities would decline next. The official story says we abandoned cities because of a deindustrialization, because of shifting markets, because of changing demographics. Those are symptoms. The cause is deeper, and it was documented 60 years ago. The official story says ancient cities were primitive, unorganized, smaller scale. But LiDAR scans of pre-Columbian Amazonian cities reveal something else: grid systems that rival modern planning, populations of over 100,000, and infrastructure that managed seasonal floods without concrete.
No computers.
The engineers who built those cities had no computers, no pumps, no modern materials. They had something more valuable. They had a principle that guided every decision. Here is what changes everything. The principle is this: every ancient city that survived for more than 500 years was built for humans first. Not for cars, not for commerce, not for property value, for human movement on foot, human scale, human relationships. You have walked through it. That one part of your city that still feels alive. The block where people sit on porches, where the grocery store is 2 blocks from the apartment, where you can walk to the barber and the hardware store and the diner without getting in a car. Every city has at least one block like this, and every city has 100 blocks that were planned without this principle. The Cloaca Maxima still carries stormwater through Rome because it was designed around human geography. The builders did not carve a straight concrete channel through the city. They followed the natural drainage of the 7 hills. They worked with the land, not against it. The sewers have survived 2,000 years because they were not fighting gravity. They were following it. Modern infrastructure fights gravity. We pump stormwater uphill to treatment plants. We pour concrete over floodplains and then wonder why water pools in streets. We designed for efficiency on paper and created fragility in practice. Soviet urban planners in the 1920s tried to replicate the logic of medieval neighborhoods. They studied the organic density of pre-industrial European cities. They documented exactly what made those neighborhoods work. Then they built microdistricts that followed the same physical layout, same density, same mixed uses, same proximity of housing to commerce. They failed. They failed because they eliminated the human element. The medieval quarter developed organically. People chose where to live based on relationships, not plans. The Soviet micro-district was imposed from above. It had the shape of community, but not the soul. Residents reported feeling isolated, even though the buildings were physically close to each other. The planners had copied the blueprint but missed the principle. Jane Jacobs understood this in 1961. She spent 3 years observing 200 intersections in New York. She found that mixed-use neighborhoods with short blocks and continuous foot traffic had lower crime rates and higher economic resilience than single-use zones separated by wide roads. The principle was so consistent that she could predict the character of a neighborhood just by looking at the block length and the number of doorways facing the street. The people who knew this best never wrote books. They built cities that outlasted their own civilization. The pre-Columbian Amazonians built roads wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side, not wide enough for trucks. The Romans built forum spaces that fit exactly the number of people who could comfortably stand and converse. The medieval Europeans built market squares that were never larger than the distance a human voice could carry. You can see the difference in the bones of the city. Walk through a downtown built before 1920. The streets are narrow, the blocks are short, the buildings have windows facing the sidewalk. Now, walk through a downtown built after 1950. The streets are wide enough for 4 lanes of traffic. The blocks are long enough for a supermarket and its parking lot. The buildings have blank walls facing the street. The first was designed for people. The second was designed for cars. Here is the unsettling part. The principle was never lost. It was deliberately replaced. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 funneled $40 billion into interstate construction. That money did not just build roads, it reshaped the entire logic of American urban design. Cities tore out streetcar lines. They widened streets to accommodate traffic projections. They rezoned downtowns to prioritize parking minimums over human scale. The principle of a human-centered design was traded for the principle of vehicle throughput. The consequences are visible in every ghost town. You can drive through a suburb with perfectly planned cul-de-sacs and an empty main street. The planning was flawless by the metrics that mattered to the planners. Traffic flow, property values, tax revenue. But the life was absent because the metric that actually mattered was never measured. Did this place make people want to be outside? Did it create opportunities for unplanned interaction? Did it feel like a community or a storage facility for human bodies? If you have felt that hollowness driving through a perfect suburb with a dead center, you are registering something real, a place designed without a human variable. That awareness is rare, and it is the reason this channel exists. Subscribe if you want to keep tracking the forensic signs that predict which cities will hollow out next. In the comments, tell me the street name of the one block in your city that still feels genuinely alive, the one your instincts tell you the planners got right. Declassified USRC floodplain maps tell a similar story. The maps from the 1940s show flood damage concentrated in naturally flood-prone areas. The maps from the 2000s show damage concentrated in car-dependent suburban zones. The principle, again, built for humans, and the infrastructure works with nature. Built for cars, and you pave over the natural drainage. The water has nowhere to go. The damage compounds. The abandoned ghost towns of the American West were designed with more foresight than most modern suburbs. The boomtowns had narrow streets, mixed-use blocks, and walkable distances because they were built before the car. When the mine closed or the railroad moved, the town died. But the design was not the cause of death. The cause was external. The modern ghost town dies from internal causes. The design itself creates the conditions for decline. A neighborhood zoned exclusively for residential use has no economic engine. A neighborhood zoned exclusively for commercial use has no residents to support the businesses. A neighborhood separated by a 6-lane road from the nearest grocery store becomes a food desert. These are not accidents. They are the predictable outcome of a system that optimized for the wrong variables. The principle that ancient builders understood intuitively was this: a city is not a collection of buildings connected by roads. A city is a network of relationships facilitated by physical proximity. When you design for proximity, you create resilience. When you design for separation, you create fragility. You have felt this if you have ever lived in a place where you could walk everywhere. The serendipity of running into someone you know. The convenience of stopping at the hardware store on the way home from the barber. The safety of eyes on the street. These are not luxuries. They are the basic output of human-centered design. And you have felt the opposite if you have ever lived in a place where every errand requires a car. the isolation of the garage-to-garage commute, the sterility of the strip mall parking lot, the emptiness of the sidewalk that nobody uses. These are not inevitable features of modern life. They are the direct result of planning decisions made in the middle of the 20th century. Here is the hardest part to accept. The planners knew. The Federal Highway Administration commissioned studies in the 1950s that documented the social costs of car-centered design. The studies found that neighborhoods bisected by highways experienced increases in crime, decreases in property values, and fragmentation of community ties. The studies were filed. The highways were built anyway. The reason was not ignorance, it was priority. The highway lobby had political power. The pedestrian did not. The car manufacturers had advertising budgets. The neighborhood association did not. The principle of human scale was not refuted. It was outspent. But here is where it gets personal. You live in a city built by planners who never asked the question that ancient builders answered daily. Does this space make life better? Not does it increase traffic flow. Not does it maximize tax revenue. Does it make life better for the humans who inhabit it? Every boarded-up storefront, every sterile sidewalk, every downtown that feels like a museum of failure. These are not accidents. They are the predictable outcome of a system that forgot its purpose. The 10,000 abandoned cities of human history each have their own specific story. Climate, invasion, resource depletion. But the modern ghost town has a single common cause. The design principle was abandoned. The human scale was traded for the vehicle scale. And once the design principle is wrong, everything built on top of it is fragile. There is a principle hidden in every ancient city that survived. And there is a principle missing from every modern city that died. The same principle, the same pattern, the same warning. If you have ever felt like a stranger in your own city, like the place you grew up in was replaced by something that does not recognize you, you are not wrong. The pattern is real, and understanding it is the first step. The evidence is laid out. The principle is clear. But we are only halfway to the solution. There is a city that reversed this pattern, a small American downtown that tore out its car-centered infrastructure and rebuilt for human scale. The results are measurable in foot traffic, in business openings, in crime reduction. Every metric that mattered to the original planners improved. But the story of how they did it challenges everything you just learned. Do not let this thread snap. Subscribe now so you get that continuation immediately when it lands. And before you go, drop the name of your own city in the comments and answer this honestly. Does it feel designed for you to walk through or for you to drive through and leave?